Hello and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence with me, Niall Murphy. And here I am recording this on the 11th of October 2025. And today I want to talk about an evergreen topic. Why? Because the news cycle is so densely packed at the moment I just can't keep up. And God, you know, it's quite overwhelming and exhausting to even begin to think about half the stuff that's going on, you know, in the Western world at the moment. So what I really want to do is talk about an evergreen subject that has been on my mind quite a lot, that I think a lot of people should be thinking about actually. And that is a group of people who I've heard, there's a bloke called Martin Durkin, he's got a channel called Guerrilla Science, and he was talking about a thing called the new class, at least from the perspective of the UK. What sort of group of people did he refer to these people as? Well, first he said that whenever he went to like green demonstrations, he didn't see any working class people on green demonstrations, and he didn't see any middle class people who worked in the commercial sectors on green demonstrations. No, they all seemed to be posh. They all seemed to be people who were like who either worked for the charity sector or the public sector or some other sector where their money does not come from the free market but comes either from charity or from taxpayer funded source. And he said that the real issue in a case like what's been going on in the Western world, dating back I suppose to the 19th century, possibly even further back if you would think about it, is this class of people that pass off as the intelligentsia, who they've never been particularly fans of the free market, he said, and they've never been people to generate wealth. If anything, they've been people who've come from a more aristocratic bent in society, or, you know, since universities came along, an intellectual class of people who are, well, you'd say, too posh to work. And if they do work, their jobs are pretty much created outside of the free market. And he explained that these are the people who are responsible for making the state bigger. In a way, you could say that these people are probably what caused socialists to inflate the state and then create a sort of communist state. And what they always end up doing is destroying the economy of any country that they get too powerful in, because they end up running out of other people's money. And he says that this particular group of people, they sneer and look down upon people who work and do actual real life jobs. They sneer upon the free market and even free market capitalism itself, because they consider it to be vulgar, because all it's done is lift a lot of the oi polloi peasant classes who would be at the bottom out of poverty, and they are desperately trying to get them back into poverty. And what he was suggesting was that socialism has never ever been on the side of the working classes, and that therefore all throughout my life that I've lived amongst a lie. And I actually believe what he says to be true. So who are these people, and where are they, and how do they get inside our minds? And I have been doing this kind of searching for malware. This is the thing I've been trying to do. I've been trying to understand how do they get into my minds and what have they done to our society. The first thing that is a very, very difficult thing for us to do as human beings is surrender our egos, because we don't like to think that we don't control our world. And the problem is that if there are like very, clever, Machiavellian social engineers who've got into our minds, they basically created the schools that we went to, they basically created the indoctrination centres that indoctrinated us all throughout our minds. They created the conditioning centres that conditioned our minds and imprinted upon us all of this stuff from a young age, and then we grew up into this. And we had very little access to be able to develop independent thought, because the ability to be able to think critically and to be able to think for ourselves, as well as the ability to understand argumentation via good methods such as the trivium, were actually taken away from us. So therefore, as a result of that, our brains have been filled with a lot of stuff that has been detrimental to us. And a lot of this stuff has actually been lies, half-truths, things like that, misconception, and so where to unravel it? Well, I would like to start from my own childhood, because when I was a kid, at least in the UK, even though I was at this naughty boys boarding school, which most certainly wasn't posh, right? One of the things that I do remember from the 70s and the 80s is that we did have to sing hymns in assembly, because it was very Christian. And one of the things I remember about singing hymns was there were two different hymn books that I can remember of, right? One was called Hymns Ancient and Modern, and another one was called With Cheerful Voice. And I was looking recently at famous members of the Fabian Society, and one of the people that I actually found who was a Fabian was a bloke called Percy Dermer, or Percy Dermer. I don't actually know how his surname was pronounced. But when I was a kid at school, I remember that his name was in brackets as the writer, or how could I say, co-writer of a lot of hymns. And I found out that he was a Fabian. They'd actually Fabianised Anglican Christianity. That would certainly explain recent events with, how could I say, the latest Archbishop of Canterbury, the previous woke one, etc., etc. Well, one of the things I do remember about this was John Bunyan's hymn, the Pilgrim's Song, you know. And anyone who would have been of a certain age, who would have been in England or would have had Anglican Christianity, would know about that song, you know. And one of the things that I remember was the beginning of the third verse in the John Bunyan version was no goblin or foul fiend, or hobgoblin nor foul fiend can daunt his spirit. He knows he at the end shall life inherit. In Percy Dermer's rewritten version, it was, since Lord thou dost defend us with thy spirit, we know we at the end shall life inherit. What he had done, and what I kind of thought that he had done, is he'd taken the story of the hero's journey out of the hymn and replaced the inner mysteries with just blind following of what you should follow outside. We were no longer singing from the, about the pilgrim. We were now armchair pilgrims, so to speak. So we were no longer warriors, we were now keyboard warriors. You see what I mean? And I kind of found out, what did I find out? That this member of the Fabian Society was not only, a Christian who had written and rewritten hymns, and in this compilation of books called the English Hymnal, which then led to With Cheerful Voice, the hymn book that I would have sung from as a kid. Not the other one, Ancient and Modern. That one was left alone. We've got a better vibe from that book, right? That's the thing. So they Fabianised Christianity, and this was long before there was a Tony Blair, right? And then, of course, I told people about my story, my War of the Worlds story. I heard the rock opera War of the Worlds when I was a kid, and as a result, it brought me into a fear. But I don't blame the Fabians for that, because how would the Fabians know, right, that one of their members, H.G. Wells, would write a novel, and that somehow it would inspire a sort of a rock and musical producer 7 decades later to base a musical version on that story, that therefore would cause some kid to have somewhat of a psychotic or shamanic psychotic episode brought on by a 1970s rock opera. I mean, that's a very long shot as far as a conspiracy goes, so I can't say that that was malware. Nevertheless, it just so turns out that H.G. Wells, writer of these stories, himself was a Fabian, right? I believe also Aldous and Julian Huxley were too, as well as people like Bertrand Russell. I'm not actually sure about Bertrand Russell, but George Bernard Shaw most certainly was anyway, that's for sure. Right, so these Fabians have been around a long time, and now of course, who we got now? Keir Starmer and Tony Blair are a couple of Fabians that we have at the moment, right? These people who have been trying to bring in communism slowly, catchy monkey, incrementally, glacially over time, without a violent revolution, without bringing it on very suddenly, by trying to con us into consenting to stuff that we otherwise wouldn't consent to by socially engineering us. And this has made me think, well, just how deep does my social reverse engineering have to go? And who are these people, and what have they done to infiltrate pretty much every single part of the society that I came from? So when I had this realization that a lot of the hymns had been done like that, then the next conclusion I'd come to is that well, when I was a kid, why was there so much apparently socialist influenced working class people? This is one of the things that now I look back on and I think, well, how can this even possibly be? A lot of the people who were how to say, musicians or what have you, and Billy Bragg, there was Paul Weller, a couple of members of Madness were even taken in by this, although they weren't overtly political in their writings, right? But how and why did this happen? Because by the time the 1980s come along, when Maggie was in power, a lot of the people who actually made their own money were from the working classes. There was a real rise of the working classes. But the thing is that there were inverted snobs within the working classes who kind of looked down as they looked up. And a lot of these people were on the dole and looked at these people who were doing well as being greedy. I suppose I was one of them. And retrospectively, as I look back, I thought I can see how maybe I was influenced the wrong way because of this. And a lot of people ended up on the dole. Now I know, because I spent a lot of time in my teen years and my early 20s around a lot of these people who were claiming benefits, and one of the things that I kind of noticed, that if you were of the mentality that you could make your own luck and that you could work and you could get somewhere, and if you could make it that your face fitted, you were probably all right back in those days, and you would kind of do well for yourself. Now you wouldn't do well in that environment now, unfortunately, right? But back then you could have done. And I suppose even, in the 1960s there would have been a time when that would have been good. There was a kind of working class done good wave in the 1960s, another one in the 1980s. And of course this was good for for free market capitalism. But the problem with free market capitalism, at least in so far as it benefited people who were entrepreneurial, who were actually pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, but didn't have the right sort of education that the intelligentsia liked, was that they didn't really want those people to be there. They didn't want the competition, because they're kind of a bit aristocratic in the way that they are. They look down upon people as being some sort of vermin, and they wish to take. Now, this is one of the reasons I think in recent years that the state, and should we say, the part of the private sector that has contracts, if you like, agreements with government, which is kind of a little bit more like state corporate fascist than it is capitalist, this modern form of corporatism that exists at the moment, and the charity sector, and what you'd think of as the third sector, the sector where part public money, part private money under contract to government, part charity, that sector that exists outside of the free market. Which is why I suppose they want to tax everyone into oblivion, but eventually they'll run out of money because there'll be no one left for them to tax, and they'll just bankrupt the economy. We've seen this happen in Soviet Russia, that's the thing. Now China's come up with some sort of way of dealing with this, and I think this is one of the reasons why they want to go for the China model. Now I don't think the West is ready for this, and this is why I think that it will not work. But one of the things that I do think about quite a lot is the fact that the Fabians and a certain group of intellectual snobs that came from the upper, more academic class, the sort of people that don't want to burden themselves or dirty themselves with real work. They'd rather study, how can I say, certain subjects. They'd rather get degrees in obscure knowledge, right? They can't really deal in any real work. And of course, well, what happened was a lot of people came to the conclusion, right, that the social justice warriors of 10 years ago would die out. They thought they'd die out because they'd get rubbish degrees and then they just die out, and then the free market would carry on. But what they didn't realise was that no, they didn't die out. they might have got rubbish degrees, lesbian dance studies or something like that, but the PR, what do they call it? No, it's HR, that's right. HR departments seem to have benefited from those types of people being in their companies. And there's this sort of problem that we have at the moment where HR departments make sure that anyone who doesn't conform to certain socialist, lefty, wokey narratives are cancelled. And of course, corporations are so desperate, and have been for quite a while, from Black Lives Matter to all of these other causes, to pay lip service to all of this. And the HR departments and a very well organised socialist lefty lot will go out and boycott and cancel anyone who doesn't conform to all of this. And corporations are very much at the behest of this, that anyone's reputation will be ruined if they don't go along with this. So the free market has suffered, and corporations have been very much at the behest of this kind of intelligentsia thinking, because if small businesses can pretty much be boycotted, and as a result of that, in order for big businesses to be able to survive, they have to have their PR companies and their HR departments make them look good to whatever intelligentsia dominates at the moment. And this is how we've ended up in this situation. This is a kind of socialist takeover, if you like, of capitalism. It's no longer real capitalism anymore, hasn't been for quite a while now. And well, the capitalists are moving to places like Dubai as a result of this. So this is one of the problems that the West is having. The West now, well, I personally think will fall. I think it will fail and it will fall. Anyone stuck there will be imprisoned pretty much. But it won't, but it will just fall or go into oblivion as it unravels, because it's most certainly not ready to adopt the China model, because its infrastructure is not there in order for that to succeed, you see. And, well, one of the problems is that the Fabians, yes, they've managed to infiltrate a certain part, or socially engineer a certain part of the middle classes, because some of the middle classes have to appear to be benevolent, so that the suicidal empathy that they have to have for the Palestinians or for black people or gay people or all of that, even though some of these people are actually some of the nicer people and they're not, how can I say, the spiteful, angry, militant types out there, right? But they have to be seen to be nice, so they're the ones who have, through suicidal empathy, conformed to all of this. The more elite intelligentsia of the Schwabocracy, who wish to socially engineer the world, have done a very good job at creating the world that we live in now. So you've got this bunch of Bond villains at the top, right? You've got these kind of well-meaning but horribly misguided, nice middle-class people in the middle, right? But then you've also got the people who say at the poor end, in the working classes, who never actually managed to succeed in surviving without state handouts or whatever, who have developed this kind of attitude, I suppose. And I mean, you know, I met a lot of them in a lot of places that I went to, pretty much everywhere where, you know, from all the alternative towns that I was in, to pretty much all of the dropouts that I ever lived with or met all throughout my life. I met a lot of people who, and I kind of felt that this mentality had actually affected me as well. That, you know, the world owes us something, and how unfair it is that there's these people at the top. But at the same time, what I didn't realise until, I suppose, you know, not all that long ago, was that it is important for a lot of us to have those resentments, because that's how you divide society, and that's how you kind of create a society that is self-defeating and that isn't free, because there's always someone that you have to hate, or there's always someone that you have to other, and there's always someone that is, you know, you think it's unfair that they're where they are where they're at. When in all, you know, in all honesty, the more I've taken this malware out of my head, the more I realise that no, if people become successful by whatever means that they become, and they can do it on their own terms, why should I have a problem with these people? I mean, why should I have a problem even if I don't like the industries that they're in? If someone has some kind of integrity as a human being and they've done well for themselves, why should I resent them? I mean, resentment is not a very good feeling to have. It's not something that you want to define yourself by. Why is that a good thing? Why should I envy someone? Envy, after all, and you know, the politics of envy is something that's actually very destructive. Why should anyone be like that? When a person can actually aspire to be a better version of themselves without having to be bitter or embittered about people outside of yourself. The only real enemies, as far as I can see, that we have in this world are those who want to target our freedoms, take them away from us, impoverish us, immiserate us, surveil us, etc. The Machiavellians, the psychopaths, the greedy people, the control freaks, they're the only people. Again, you know, this is one of the reasons why I'm looking at ideological forms and thinking, I want to be able to pull myself out from all of this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I kind of think of a certain, certain friend who I don't think I'm friends with anymore. I didn't really want to get in a fight about left and right. The thing that really pissed me off the most was the fact that I don't consider the left versus right thing to even be relevant. Not at all. Not now that I see Nick Tenconi from UKIP and Piers Corbyn both on the same anti-digital ID protest. You know, and while we have these divisions, we are not uniting against a bigger problem. This is the thing. And you know, I would say to anyone and everyone that I have not seen eye to eye with over the years, or that I've fallen out with over the years, you know, that we should put all these problems behind us. These problems are not really relevant. All that matters is, if our freedoms are to be taken away from us and we are to live in a dystopia, then that's where our energy should be focused. Our energy should not be focused on our political ideologies, how we see the world. You know, what about this thing from the left? What about this thing from the right? Because my perspective on all of this has always been agnostic. My perspective on this is that both sides are capable of going off track, and you know, you cannot, a lot of the time, unfortunately, explain the outside of a frame to someone who's never been outside of the frame, and that is an issue. So we have got some malevolent social engineers above us. I would look up Martin Durkin, Guerrilla Science, New Class, and see what he has to say about these people, and then, you know, get back to me and tell me. And by the way, before I go, I'm right at the end of the video. People probably turn the video off at this stage because they don't want to watch it all, right? I'm not getting enough views, I'm not getting enough comments, and I'm not getting enough new subscriptions. The algorithm doesn't favour me. So if the algorithm doesn't favour me, and you've got this far in the video where you got to this part where I'm talking now, help me out. Help me out in any way that is free to you. I mean, obviously, it's not a burden and is free to you. Help me out in any way. Subscribe if you haven't. Like if you haven't. Comment if you haven't. Tell a friend about this video. Share the link with them if you haven't. Okay, I'll leave it at that. See you later, alligator. See you soon. Baboon.